He trusted his family. He signed nothing. He still owed $40,000. So I'm Sean Miller. I'm 26, I live in Texas, and I work in IT. Pretty average life, honestly. I'm not some high-rolling tech bro or anything. I do mid-tier support at a logistics software company, and I rent a modest apartment in Round Rock. My idea of a splurge is adding guac to my Chipotle. So you can imagine my confusion when I got a letter from my bank claiming I was 3 months behind on a car loan payment. For a car I never bought. At first, I thought it was a scam. The envelope looked official, though, logo, return address, and everything. It said I owed over $1,800 in missed payments on a $28000 auto loan through their vehicle financing division. I actually laughed at first. I don't even own a car. I drive a hand-me-down Honda Civic from 2009 that my cousin sold me for $2,000 cash. But curiosity got the better of me. I called the number on the letter, still half expecting a sketchy call center with someone trying to con me. Nope, it was the actual bank. I confirmed the letter reference number, gave them the last 4 of my SSN, and then the woman on the line, Angela, I remember her name, went quiet for a second. Then she said, "Mr. Miller, you're listed as the primary borrower for a vehicle loan issued in January. The account is past due." And I'm sitting there like, what vehicle loan? I asked for the details, and she read them out like she was reading a grocery list. Ford F-150, 2021 model, black, VIN ending in 8973, registered in Houston, Texas. Original loan amount $28,047. Interest rate, 6.9%. First payment missed in March. I froze. I haven't even been to Houston in over a year. I told her straight up, I never bought that truck. She kind of hesitated, like she's heard this before, but said she'd start an internal investigation. She gave me a fraud case number and said someone from the investigations team would contact me within 5 to 7 business days. I got off the call feeling like someone had ripped open a trapdoor under me. I couldn't figure out how this happened. My credit isn't bad, but it's not great either. How did someone even get approved for a $28000 loan using my name? Then it hit me. About 6 months ago, I'd applied for a Best Buy card and got denied. No explanation, just a standard, you don't qualify email. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now I was putting pieces together I didn't even know were part of the same puzzle. I pulled my credit report that night. And sure enough, there it was. The Ford F-150 loan. Opened in January, with all the details matching what the bank rep had told me. But that wasn't even the worst part. There were 2 other inquiries listed that I didn't recognize. One from a dealership in Houston in December. Another from a cell phone provider I've never used. I was freaking out. Identity theft, right? That was the obvious answer. Someone must have gotten my info and used it to buy a truck. But then I started thinking about who would even want to do that. My social, my address, even my job details must have been used to pass the loan verification. I filed a police report that same night, then made appointments with both my HR rep and the bank branch nearest me. I needed to get out in front of this before it trashed my credit completely. But here's where it gets dark. 2 days later, I get a call from the fraud investigator at the bank. She asks me if I have any relatives in Houston. I tell her no, not really. Maybe a couple second cousins I haven't seen in years. Then she pauses and says, "Are you aware that the person who applied for the loan had all your correct info, including employer contact, insurance, and pay stubs?" I said, "No, I didn't authorize anyone to use my information." And she goes, "We have a recorded call from the loan processing team where the applicant verifies details verbally. The voice sounds very similar to yours." Now I'm starting to sweat. Did someone clone my voice? Deepfake it? Is that even possible without my knowledge? And then she drops the bomb. "We have surveillance footage from the dealership. Would you be willing to come in and take a look at it?" I drove down to Houston that weekend. Walked into the bank's downtown branch like a guy about to meet his evil twin. And sure enough, they take me into a small conference room and play a clip. The guy in the footage looked like me. Like a lot like me. But not exactly. A little heavier. Beard was shaped differently. Same skin tone. Same height. But clearly not me if you were paying attention. But to a random employee at a dealership, it was close enough. I kept staring at the screen thinking, who the hell is this? Then something clicked. My cousin Derek. I hadn't talked to Derek in a while. He's from my mom's side. Grew up a bit rough, in and out of jobs, always chasing a quick buck. Last time we saw each other was at Thanksgiving the year before last. He'd asked if I still worked in IT, asked about how much I made, and even joked about how my job sounded real fancy. I didn't think anything of it. Until now. I called my mom later that day, just casually asking about Derek. She was weirdly quiet. Finally she goes, "Well, he's been in Houston working at some car dealership, I think." Of course he has. So now I'm sitting here with a fraud claim pending, a potential criminal investigation underway, and the growing suspicion that my own cousin impersonated me to buy a damn truck. I haven't called him yet. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to drive down to wherever he is and punch him square in the face. But I know I can't. Not without evidence. The bank says they're escalating the fraud claim and that I shouldn't have to pay the balance once they finalize their investigation. But it could take months. Meanwhile, my credit is wrecked, I can't get approved for anything, and I've had to freeze all 3 of my credit reports just to be safe. So yeah, one day I'm living my boring little IT life, and the next I find out I'm the proud owner of a truck I never saw, signed for, or drove, and the guy who probably did it shares my blood. I asked the bank to send me copies of every document they had on file for the loan, the application, the contract, the ID scans, everything. They agreed, but warned me that it might take a few days because some of the files were archived at the dealership and needed to be requested. 3 days later, I got a thick envelope in the mail from their fraud investigations unit. I tore it open at my kitchen table with this pit in my stomach that I couldn't explain. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe some random stranger's name that somehow got tangled up with mine. But the second I saw the application, my blood ran cold. There was my name, my social, my old address, my current employer, my income, accurate down to the dollar. And then, scrawled across the bottom of the loan agreement, a signature that looked eerily close to mine. Not exact, but close enough that someone glancing fast wouldn't notice. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the curves and pressure points with my eyes, and the more I looked, the more it pissed me off. Because it wasn't my hand. It mimicked my style, but it lacked the way my M always loops wide, or how I always cross my T low when I'm in a hurry. This wasn't a forged signature by a stranger. This was someone who'd seen me sign my name before. Someone who had access to that kind of detail. I flipped through the rest of the pages, looking for anything that could tell me who pulled this off. On the 3rd page of the loan documents, under the primary contact section, they had listed a phone number. I almost skipped right past it until something about the area code made me pause. It was local, sure, but not from where I live. It was from Corpus Christi. I only knew one person from there. My cousin Brett. I stared at the number like it was going to morph into something else if I looked hard enough. Then I picked up my phone, went into my contacts, and searched Brett. Same number. Exactly the same. 3 digits, dash, 3 digits, dash 4 more. I matched it 5 times just to be sure. Same damn number. My hands were cold. I sat there frozen, clutching this stupid packet of papers that suddenly felt like they weighed 20 pounds, and all I could think was, what the hell did he do? Brett and I were never close. Not really. He's one of those cousins you only see at family weddings or funerals, always cracking jokes that aren't that funny and asking if you're still doing nerd stuff whenever you try to talk about your job. He'd borrowed money from me once, back in 2019, and never paid it back. Said he had a business plan with some guys from high school, something about flipping ATVs. Total garbage, and I knew it even then, but I let him have the money because my mom asked me to be nice. And after that, I avoided him as much as possible. But now here he was, apparently taking it several steps further, stealing my identity, getting a $28,000 truck in my name, and then ghosting the payments. I didn't even know how to process it. How did he get my social? How did he know where I worked, how much I made, or what kind of car I'd be most likely to ignore in a database? It was like someone had assembled a puzzle of my life using pieces I didn't know were lying around. I called the fraud investigator at the bank back and gave her the number, told her it belonged to a relative, and asked if that matched the call logs from the loan application. She said she'd check and call me back. 20 minutes later, she confirmed it. The number had been used to confirm employment and verify income over the phone during the initial application process. She said, "It was a man who claimed to be your supervisor. He said your performance was exceptional and that you just received a raise. My supervisor is a woman named Candace, and I haven't had a raise in over a year." It was official now. This wasn't some data breach or accidental identity mix-up. It was a full-on scam, and someone in my own family had orchestrated the whole thing. I sat back in my chair, trying to remember the last time I'd even seen Brett in person. Maybe at my uncle's birthday party last summer? He'd been bragging about his new truck then. Said he finally got a vehicle worthy of hauling his ambitions. Whatever the hell that means. I remember him saying it had great mileage for a pickup and that he got it for a steal from some dealership down in Houston. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was busy making a plate of brisket and trying not to get dragged into another one of his weird crypto rants. Now, all of it was clicking into place like dominoes tipping over in my head. The truck, the dealership, the number, the signature. He must have gotten a copy of my pay stub at some point. Maybe from my mom, who still gets all excited about sharing news like Sean got promoted with the extended family and probably forwarded a screenshot of my work info without thinking twice. Or maybe he swiped a piece of mail from a family gathering. However he did it, it was personal. It wasn't random. I didn't even know what to do next. Confront him? Go to the cops? Call my mom and ask if she had any idea what her nephew was up to? Every option felt like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. The bank was still handling their side of the fraud investigation, but now I had proof, a name, a number, a signature that didn't match. I knew who did it. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I stared at my phone for a long time before dialing Brett's number. I don't know what I thought I'd hear, some panicked confession, maybe, or one of his trademark deflections. But when he picked up, his voice cracked before he even said hello. It was like he already knew why I was calling. I said his name once, flat, no emotion, just Brett. There was silence on the line for a second, and then he said, real fast, I don't know anything. That was all. Not a question, not even a hello. Just a preloaded defense, like someone who'd rehearsed it 100 times and was now trying to pass it off as spontaneous. I told him I had copies of the documents. I said his phone number was on the loan application. I said the signature looked like mine but wasn't mine, and that the dealership had footage. I gave him every chance to say something honest, anything, even a weak-ass excuse, but all he kept saying was, I don't know what you're talking about, like a scratch CD that wouldn't skip to the next track. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten him. I just said, we're going to have to deal with this, man. You can't keep pretending. And then he hung up. About an hour later, I drove to see Aunt June. She lived in a one-story beige brick house in a quiet suburb just north of Austin, the kind of place with wind chimes on the porch and flower beds that looked like they got way too much attention. I hadn't been to her place in maybe a year, but she acted surprised to see me when I knocked on her door like I was some stranger selling solar panels. I told her we needed to talk, and she hesitated for half a second before stepping aside and letting me in. The smell of potpourri hit me in the face like it always did. Her living room was spotless. Too spotless, like she'd cleaned up in a hurry. She offered me tea, which I declined, and then sat across from me in this stiff-backed chair like she was getting ready for a job interview. Her fingers were clutched around a throw pillow like it was keeping her grounded. I told her what the bank had found, what Brett had said, or more accurately, what he didn't say, and showed her the contact info on the loan application. I didn't accuse. I just presented the facts like I was reading them off a weather report. She looked at the page, her eyes flicking down to the number, and I saw something tighten in her face. She pressed her lips together and shook her head slowly, like she was disappointed in me, not Brett. Then she said, Sean, these kinds of things happen. It's probably just some kind of system error. You work with computers, you know how easily things can get mixed up. It was such a blatant dodge, I almost laughed. I told her this wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a typo or a digital hiccup. Someone had physically gone into a dealership, used my name, my identity, and forged a contract to drive off in a truck I never saw. She started getting fidgety, like she couldn't find a comfortable spot on her chair. Maybe they just needed your name to qualify, she muttered, not even looking at me anymore. That was the first real crack in the wall, and I knew it. So I asked her straight up if Brett had used my information. She looked me dead in the face and said, I think you're making this a much bigger deal than it is. Families help each other, Sean. We've all done things to support one another. Like that somehow made it okay. Like stealing someone's identity and saddling them with a 5-figure debt was just a favor that got slightly out of hand. I left before I said something I'd regret. The drive home was a blur of brake lights and fury. My phone buzzed halfway through, a text from a buddy I knew from college who now worked in financing for a private lending firm. I'd messaged him earlier, asking if he could help me look into any other credit activity in my name that might have slipped past my radar. His text said, Hey man, I found something weird. Call me ASAP. I pulled into a Walmart parking lot and called him right there, engine still running. He said my name was on another active loan. Different lender, smaller amount, $14,000, but still recent. The funds had been issued just 2 months ago for residential renovation. I didn't understand. Renovation of what? He read off the details. The address was in Mesquite, a suburb of Dallas. The file listed me as the property owner. I asked if there were photos or any kind of inspection report, and he said no, but he did find the disbursement trail. The money had been paid out to a contractor listed under a company name I'd never heard of, Lone Star Property Solutions, LLC. The billing address on their file? The same as Brett's old P.O. box. I felt sick. This wasn't just about a truck. This was bigger. This was a second loan, a second fraud, tied to a house I'd never seen in a city I didn't live in. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. Someone had sat down and mapped this out. And all of it, every page, every false signature, every forged document, was anchored to my name. My life, my credit, my future. And the person behind it wasn't a stranger in some fishing ring overseas. It was someone I'd shared a table with on holidays. Someone who'd stood beside me in family photos. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. By the time the second loan surfaced, I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. My credit was tanking. My stomach was in knots every morning when I checked my bank accounts, and the sense of betrayal was so thick I could feel it in my throat. So I did what I should have done earlier. I hired a lawyer. Not just some guy off Google, either. A friend of a friend put me in touch with a real bulldog out of Austin named Michael Keener. Guy looked like he hadn't smiled in 10 years and talked in short, clipped sentences like his words were on a stopwatch. Exactly the kind of guy I needed. We met in his office, all clean wood panels and diplomas in heavy frames, and I laid out everything. The truck loan, the forged signature, the bogus renovation, Brett's name, Aunt June's deflections. Michael didn't react much, just jotted down notes like he was building a case one bullet point at a time. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "First step's filing a formal fraud complaint. Then we subpoena the footage. I guarantee they have it. Dealerships record everything now." He wasn't wrong. The bank's fraud team had already archived the surveillance footage from the truck dealership in Houston. After Michael filed the complaint and sent in a request with his letterhead on it, it only took 2 days to get access. I got a call from him that morning. No greeting, just, "You need to see this." I drove straight to his office. He had the video queued up on a small monitor in his conference room. The timestamp said January 12th, 2:43 p.m. It showed a man walking into the dealership wearing a FedEx jacket, a matching baseball cap, and khakis. It took me a few seconds to realize it was Brett. The beard was trimmed differently, and he was wearing glasses he doesn't need, but it was him. No doubt. He walked like he always has, that weird shoulder-hunched shuffle like he's in a rush, but doesn't want to look like he's in a rush. I watched as he walked up to the front desk, smiled, pulled something out of a manila folder. Then he shook hands with the finance guy, sat down, and pulled out a fake ID. I could see it clearly when the banker scanned it. My name, my face, but it wasn't my driver's license. It looked close, but there were subtle differences. The wrong issue date. An address I'd never lived at. It was a good fake, just not perfect. Brett sat there like he did this every week, nodding along, pretending to take calls on his phone, even scribbling out my signature in the exact same style I'd seen on the loan documents. It was almost clinical. When the video ended, I just sat there, staring at the screen like it might rewind on its own. Michael said, "This is enough to trigger a full criminal case. I'll file the paperwork with the county. You'll want to notify the police directly, too. I'll help with that." The next day, we filed the police report. I walked into the precinct with a folder full of evidence, printouts of both loans, the video stills, screenshots of Brett's number tied to the applications, the contractor payouts, all of it. The officer at the desk raised an eyebrow when he saw the amount of paperwork, but once Michael explained everything, they took it seriously. Within 48 hours, they opened a fraud investigation. Brett's name was now on file. The case number was real. There were detectives assigned. I wasn't just shouting into the void anymore. Around the same time, the bank froze both loans. I got the email late in the afternoon from their fraud investigations unit confirming that the Ford F-150 note and the $14,000 renovation loan had been flagged, locked, and marked for investigation. Repayment demands were suspended pending the outcome of the case. My credit would still show the accounts, but they added fraud alerts to both so lenders wouldn't come after me during the review period. It wasn't total relief, but it was something. The pressure valve turned just enough that I could breathe again. But even with the accounts frozen, the damage wasn't undone. My credit score had already dropped by almost 100 points. I had to put a full freeze on all 3 credit bureaus and start the long process of disputing each line item. My email inbox was flooded with updates, requests, and automated messages. I'd check one, and 3 more would come in. Every time I looked at my phone, it was another reminder that this wasn't over. What stuck with me more than anything, though, was that video. Watching Brett walk in there with my name on his lips, acting like he was doing nothing wrong, smiling while he ripped off his own cousin, it burned in a way I didn't know betrayal could burn. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone getting in over their head. This was calculated. This was planned. And now that the police were involved, it was only a matter of time before the rest of the family found out what he'd done. And I had no idea how far the fallout would go. The voicemail from Aunt June came in the morning, right as I was brushing my teeth and trying to convince myself to get through another day of paperwork and phone calls. I saw her name flash across the screen and ignored it, not in the mood to deal with her or anyone from that branch of the family. But when I sat down with my coffee and finally listened, her voice hit me like a punch to the chest. She was hysterical, sobbing between words, not the quiet, trembling kind of crying, but the kind where every breath sounded like it hurt. Her message started with, "Sean, please, then veered off into a scattered rant about how this doesn't have to destroy everything and how we needed to settle this in the family. She kept saying that over and over again, in the family, like it was some kind of magic phrase that would undo the fake ID, the forged documents, the loans, the signature that wasn't mine. At one point, she actually said, "You're throwing away blood over a car and some paperwork." And that's when I had to stop listening. I deleted the message halfway through. I didn't need to hear another second of her twisting the situation into something it wasn't. Later that same day, my parents called. I'd been expecting it. They were still trying to process everything, stuck somewhere between disbelief and that weird family loyalty reflex that kicks in even when it shouldn't. My mom's voice was soft when she spoke, too calm, like she was trying not to spook me. She started with, "We heard from June," then asked how I was holding up. I told her the case was moving forward, that the loans were frozen, that the lawyer had submitted the paperwork to keep my credit from collapsing further. She said she was glad, but then came the part one knew was coming. "Your dad and I were talking," she said, and I could already hear the hesitance. "We're just wondering if maybe there's another way to handle this. I mean, it's still family, Sean. Maybe we don't need to go through the courts. Maybe it doesn't have to go this far." I didn't yell. I didn't lose it. But something inside me snapped tight, like a cable pulled to its limit. I said, "If someone in your family stole $40,000 from you, forged your signature, ruined your credit, and lied to your face, would you still call them family?" They were quiet. I kept going. "That's not family. That's criminals. I don't care what DNA we share." My dad tried to jump in, his voice low like he was trying to mediate a hostage situation. He said, "We understand you're angry, son. We're just saying, maybe it's not all black and white. Maybe Brett thought you wouldn't mind, or," and that's when I cut him off. "He dressed up like a FedEx worker," I said. "He used a fake ID. He forged loan papers. There is nothing accidental about that. This wasn't a dumb mistake. This was a plan." They didn't argue after that. They just went quiet again, like maybe they finally understood what I was saying. Not just the facts, but the weight of it. The way it felt to be betrayed by someone who used to sit next to you at the kids' table, who you used to see every Thanksgiving, who once borrowed $20 for gas and promised to pay it back, but never did. The way it felt to realize that loyalty only went one way in this family, and I'd been on the wrong end of it for too long. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. Not angry, not sad, just tired. Tired of pretending that family means something when it's convenient and nothing when it counts. Tired of being the one who's expected to forgive, to absorb, to let it go because blood somehow rewrites reality. But it doesn't. Not anymore. Not for me. The trial dragged on for 5 months, and every day of it felt like being stuck in a car wreck in slow motion. From the first hearing, Brett denied everything with this smug, vacant confidence like he was daring the court to prove him wrong. He walked into the courthouse like it was some misunderstanding about a parking ticket, not a federal-level fraud case. Sat there in his cheap Navy suit, nodding along like he was the reasonable one in the room, while my lawyer laid out the wreckage he left in my life like a damn exhibit. The prosecution built it methodically. First, the dealership footage. The moment Brett walked in dressed in that fake FedEx uniform, grinning like he was doing community service, sliding a laminated ID across the counter with my name on it, but his picture blurred just enough to pass. Then the signature comparison. They brought in an expert who pointed out exactly where my real handwriting stopped and Brett's imitation began, circling the hesitations, the lifted strokes, the subtle differences in pressure that even I wouldn't have caught. Then came the digital trail. IP logs from the online loan application tied directly to the Wi-Fi router in Aunt June's house. A network name with Brett's old gamer tag in it. Login timestamps that matched the loan submission window down to the minute. They had emails, device IDs, two-step verification requests pinged to a burner phone he registered under a fake name but forgot to separate from his main Gmail account. It was so sloppy it was almost insulting. Still, he denied it. Right to the end. Claimed he didn't know how his name got mixed up with mine. Said he was being set up. Said it must have been someone who looked like him. Even when the judge asked him point blank why there were 2 payments from the renovation loan deposited into a checking account under his LLC, he just shrugged and said it wasn't his responsibility to explain a clerical error. He said clerical error, like it was going to make the $14,000 house that didn't exist disappear off the spreadsheet. When the verdict finally came down, it was a strange kind of quiet. The courtroom wasn't packed, just a few people from the family, a couple of reporters, and Brett's lawyer, who looked like he regretted every life choice that got him to that table. The judge read it out without fanfare. Guilty of fraud, 2 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and a court order to repay the full amount of damages. No jail time, which part of me expected, But the restitution part landed hard. $42,000 plus interest. And every payment would come with a reminder that he hadn't just borrowed money. He had tried to erase me to get it. After the ruling, Brett didn't look at me. He just stood there while the judge spoke, then turned and walked out like this was some minor inconvenience he'd have to explain at Thanksgiving. But the damage was already done. His name was public record now. Every lender he'd ever deal with would see the fraud conviction. His credit was scorched. His business, if you could even call it that, was already circling the drain. And everyone in the family finally saw what he really was, not just what they wanted to believe. And me, I was left sitting in that stiff wooden chair, surrounded by forms and signatures and quiet stares, wondering how long it would take to feel like this whole thing was behind me, wondering if it ever really would be. After the trial ended and the dust settled, the family fractured like a cracked windshield, still one piece on the surface, but shattered just enough that you could feel the tension in every phone call and text message. Aunt June cut off all contact the same week the verdict came down. No apology, no explanation, not even a passive-aggressive email. Just silence. She blocked my number, unfriended me on Facebook, and from what I heard through a cousin, told everyone she was done with betrayal. As if pressing charges against the guy who impersonated me and robbed me blind was somehow my betrayal, not Brett's. She still defends him, still calls it a misunderstanding, still acts like I'm the one who burned the bridge. My parents, though, eventually came around. It wasn't easy for them. They hated seeing the family fall apart like this, but they finally stopped with the maybe there's another way talk and started seeing it for what it was. My dad told me one night over dinner that he was ashamed it had taken him so long. He said, "You did the right thing, even when it was hard." And that meant more than he probably realized, because for months I'd felt like I was standing on an island, yelling into the wind, while everyone else passed around platitudes about loyalty and forgiveness. I didn't need forgiveness. I needed people to stop pretending theft was a personality quirk. I moved to Austin not long after. Got a promotion at work that gave me the push I needed, found a decent place in South Lamar with enough room for my gear, and a little patio where I could sit with a beer at night and listen to the city buzz instead of the quiet bitterness that had soaked into my old place. And then I did something I'd been wanting to do for years. I bought my own car, with my own money, in my own name. A 2022 Toyota RAV4. Paid in full. No financing. No paperwork with someone else's fingerprints on it. Just mine. About a month later, I got a message from a writer at a local tech blog I followed. She said she'd heard about my story through a friend of a friend, small town in a big city, and asked if I'd be willing to talk. I wasn't sure at first. I wasn't looking for attention, but something about it felt right, like maybe putting it into the open would make it less heavy to carry. So I sat down with her at a coffee shop off Congress and told her everything, straight through. I watched her eyes widen when I mentioned the FedEx uniform, the forged ID, the fake renovation loan tied to a house I'd never seen. She asked me near the end what the hardest part had been, and I didn't even have to think about it. The thing that shocked me the most, I said, was not that they stole the money. It was that they thought I would put up with it. That's what stuck with me. Not the debt, not the court dates, not even the nights I spent wondering if I should have just let it go. It was the certainty on their faces, the way they spoke like this would blow over, like I was just being dramatic. Like I wouldn't fight. Like I was just another easy mark. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Not ever again. About a year after the trial, I did something I never thought I would. I sat down in front of a camera, hit record, and started talking, not just about what happened to me, but about the mechanics of it. How fraud really works. How it hides behind familiar faces and polite phone calls and documents that look legitimate until they ruin your life. I didn't plan for it to be a big thing. The first few videos were just me at my desk with a cheap mic and a half-decent ring light, breaking down how someone stole $40,000 under my name and how I clawed my way out of it. But people watched. Then more people watched. The video about Brett and the fake FedEx uniform got over 100,000 views in a week. I started hearing from others, folks who had their identity stolen by family, by coworkers, by exes, people who thought they were alone, just like I did. My subscriber count started climbing faster than I could keep up with, and before long, I was getting messages from news outlets, financial educators, even a few lawyers who wanted to collaborate. I quit my job 6 months in and started running the channel full-time. I called it Fraudline. By the time I posted the final video in the series about my case, we'd hit 240,000 followers. I stood in my apartment in Austin, wearing a simple hoodie, no scripts, no editing tricks, just speaking into the lens. I said, don't be afraid to cut off even those closest to you if they are stealing from you. Blood does not cancel betrayal. It doesn't reduce the damage, it doesn't soften the impact, and it doesn't obligate you to forgive it. Family can be a beautiful thing, but the moment someone uses that word to hide their own crimes, It stops being family and becomes something else entirely. That was the last time I talked publicly about Brett. I didn't need to after that. The story had reached who it needed to reach. My life moved forward without him, without Aunt June, without the version of family I used to bend over backwards to maintain. I had a new place, a new purpose, and a career that came not from credentials or networking, but from telling the truth, even when it hurt.